Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. I just received a tweet today from some person who I imagine is not a Christian because my tweet said this. That just sounds so funny to say my tweet. But anyway, okay, on Twitter, my statement was a quote from my book that I wrote. And it says this. It was what I said. The statements, quote, "The universe is all there is," and, quote, "Science proves everything," cannot be proven scientifically. Now that's obviously true. That is, science itself cannot determine that the universe is all there is. The limits of science make this so. It doesn't mean science is worthless. It doesn't mean science is bad. It just means the tools that scientific inquisitors have are limited in their scope to figure out whether or not the universe is all there is. It's just to say they're limited, and that's okay. Mathematicians don't tell me how to cook food. Plumbers don't tell me how dry cleaning works. We have limits to our field, and that's okay. And the claim science proves everything or will prove everything cannot be proven scientifically. That is, the statement science proves everything or science will prove everything cannot be proven scientifically. These are philosophical views. And that's why people specialize and get entire degrees and write thousands and thousands of books on what's called the philosophy of science. These are philosophical statements. The reason why I said this in my book is in my book, I'm countering a common view popularly it's called scientism. It used to be called logical positivism. It was very popular about 80, 90 years ago. And it was the view that if science can't prove it, cannot demonstrate it, even conceivably cannot demonstrate it, it does not exist. It's not real. It's not even a cogent thought. So it's not just stupid to say you believe in God. It's blobbity bloop. Because if I can't put God in a test tube, I cannot prove it scientifically. It's just an irrational or worse, irrational, at best non-rational thing to say. Nowadays, logical positivism died. Its number one adherent, its number one preacher of logical positivism denied it himself late in his career. He said something like, the only problem is the whole thing was a failure. In other words, it's just silly. Even scientists, other atheists, almost all philosophers rejected it as a nonsense idea, though it held some sway for a couple decades. Well, the good news is it's been resurrected. In the last couple decades, modern-day new atheists like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and many other people who are preaching through their books very much believe in what's called logical positivism. But now it's in different terms, different words, and a popular way to say logical positivism is another way, is to say this, scientism. That is to say that science itself can or will be able to explain everything in the universe. Well, that's just false. There are numerous things science cannot prove, and I talk about them in my book. So on Twitter, I had that statement there. This is just a quote from my book. Then someone responded this. But the person said, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, neither can we disprove God or the flying teapot. I can imagine what this rhetoric will be like from a so-called doctor, ? So I guess it's supposed to be read like this. I can imagine what this rhetoric will be like from a so-called doctor, but I don't know how that's a question. But anyway, unfortunately for this person, yeah, I really am a doctor. I really do have an earned PhD. And so, sure do. But on the first point, one is, my first reflection on these kind of tweets, which, hey, I'm happy to get it, and I responded back to the person. Thanks for the comment. Depending on how you define God or flying teapot, one can disprove them. Have a blessed day. Now, my first thought on these kind of things is this is more of an emotional, psychological response. That is, I'm always surprised when people write these kinds of things anywhere. YouTube, on blogs, Facebook, Twitter, it doesn't matter. And the reason why I mean is this. I just imagine life is busy. I'm not being mean. It's just funny to me because I really am I can't imagine having the time responding to people's every blog online or on Facebook and Twitter and so forth, making little jabs like this. I guess I have other hobbies. I can't fathom the amount of time it takes to respond to these kinds of things. But I can't imagine. That's my deal, not your deal. And you're saying, David, I can imagine. I've got plenty of time on my hands, and they need to be told they're stupid. Maybe. Okay, well, we disagree on that. I don't have the time. So the other thing is, if you do disagree so much with a person and you think the person is delusional or stupid or worse, they're evil, then, well, the evil part makes a little sense to me. But if they're just stupid or delusional, I don't know why I would waste my time trying to convince them otherwise. I don't understand that. I have no compulsion to go to the local insane asylum and try to convince them that they're really not a god. There really is not a unicorn in the room. Whatever. I'm not being hateful. I'm just saying really, really delusional stuff. I have no compulsion to convince them they're wrong. And I feel that about atheists toward believers. Why even care that much? And to which they're going to say, because y'all are everywhere and you're forcing your views down my throat and you cause all the wars and so forth. So that's that other option. Like I said, if you think we're evil and you think it's good to stop evil, I agree with you. It is good to stop evil. To which I'm going to say, where did you get this concept of good and evil? Where did that come from? Why is it a good thing to stop evil? And who are you to judge me on what's evil? Because if we're just evolved Homo sapiens living on a speck of the universe, who gives a rip what I believe, and who cares how many crusades there were? Who cares how many wars have been started? We're just advanced primates doing our thing. If you disagree with me, don't try to compel me. Just kill me too. I don't want you to kill me. I don't want you to kill anybody else. Please do not kill anybody. Okay? Don't do that. I want to have, actually my real point of all this was just to address this issue about the person saying we can't disprove God or the flying teapot. The flying teapot, I don't know what this person's talking about, but I imagine it comes from Richard Dawkins, a well-known atheist who wrote several books. And one of his books, he talks about the flying spaghetti monster. I want to say one quick thing about this, and that is this constant thing that atheists say all the time, and that is, I cannot disprove a negative. So if I say, as an atheist, God does not exist, which now most atheists don't say that. They're going to say, I don't believe he exists, which is very different from he does not exist. But if you say God does not exist, and I say, what makes you say that? Prove it. The atheist is going to say, no, I don't have to prove it. I just said he's not there. I don't have to prove something does not exist. In fact, it's impossible. And so it seems to me this person is saying that same thing too. We cannot disprove God or the flying teapot. To which I say in my comment, it totally depends on how you define the term God or flying teapot. Of course, you can disprove something depending on how it's defined. If you really do believe there's a thing called a flying teapot, and it had characteristics of a teapot as I understand it, made of some type of metal, it boils water and creates tea, you put it on an oven and so forth, if it had standard properties of a teapot, and it could fly, which would be pretty cool, or creepy, I don't know, I had to experience it, I guess, and you said, there's a flying teapot, and I said, where is it? And you said, right there, and I said, where is it? You said, well, it's magical. So hold on now. If it's magical, why did you use the term teapot? In other words, teapot means certain things and certain properties, characteristics. Well, it's right there on the table, or it's right there in the air above the table. I'll say, no, it's not. And I brought in 100 people, and we had all the best lab technicians, and we examined the air quality and whatever, and everyone says, there's no teapot here. The odds are very high you're delusional. If I said there is a flying teapot or a flying spaghetti monster out past the planet's atmosphere, and yet no telescope has ever picked it up, and no satellite has ever bumped into it, and no human being or anything has ever detected it ever, there is no flying monster that's there. The odds are very high. Maybe one day we can make a new telescope that determines where the flying spaghetti monster is. But the fact is, I most certainly can disprove the negative. I can. So if I said there is no flying teapot, and I would prove that it's true that there is no flying teapot by giving counter evidence that there is no flying teapot. For example, to say it real clearly, there's 100 people in this room who do not see it, and we all can see we're not blind. That's counter evidence. I've examined it by every single scientific apparatus there exists, and none of the evidence comes out to suggest there's a flying teapot. So that's more counter evidence. I can wave my hands in the air, and it bumps nothing in the air. That's counter evidence to the claim. So I am proving that there is no teapot by counter evidence. The same thing is true with every single atheist and skeptic I've ever met and heard of. I'm sure there are others that disagree with him, but in my experience, every one of them believes, it seems these days, that the God that theists believe in, someone like myself, a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, believes that God is a creature in space. That he's a creature in space. And if you just believe hard enough, he'll appear to you too. He's just past Mars, sometimes in Orion's belt. You got to believe, and he'll appear to you. To which the atheist says, nuh-uh. Nothing in science demonstrates God's existence. And I say, prove it. I can't prove he's not there. Well, yes, you can. If I really do believe in that kind of God, if I really do believe a God is a creature in space, then that God will have physical properties of some sort. There's going to be some kind of apparatus or some kind of mathematical theory that demonstrates it somehow. But if all of the evidence we have demonstrates there is no God that fits those characteristics floating in space as we know it, then you have evidence that that God does not exist. That is, you can produce counter evidence to the belief that God does exist. Now, this is a bunch of double negatives and it might sound confusing. Let me say it, just say it one more time, maybe 3 more times. I can prove a negative. I can make it very, very, very probable that a negative proposition is true. That is to say, for example, if a person were to believe in an actual God in the space-time continuum, that God were a creature, and you said, I don't believe in that God, and I said, prove it, you would say to me, I can produce for you an enormous amount of counter evidence to your claim God exists. I can give you telescope images, I can give you radiation background measurements, I can give you all kinds of things that demonstrate that no creature exists in the solar system of which you speak. So there's an enormous amount of counter evidence. Now, the person who believes in that God might say, well, I still believe he's there, he's magical, and no scientific evidence could ever do it, but he's still in space. He's still in space. It's just you don't have a telescope that's right to pick him up and so forth. And you say, to that, you would say, an atheist would say, well then, okay, I can't prove it because now you're saying there's nothing I can do about it. But my point is, that's what I would say to this person. When you say you can't disprove the flying teapot, my answer is, yeah, you can. That is, you can make it so overwhelmingly probable to call it proving. It's overwhelmingly probable a flying teapot does not exist when nobody has any observational evidence of the teapot ever at all besides you. Well, I'm going to say that proves the negative. If someone says God does not exist, you can prove God does not exist if God is defined a certain way. Now, here's the point, and I'll wrap up on this. If I think God is a creature in space, then the counter evidence would be everything else we have in science that says there's no God there. And in my experience, that's what atheists and skeptics today believe about what I believe. When they define God, the term God, they think that I mean a God in the space-time continuum. He's just a creature. He's like a planet. He's a very complex human individual. He's like Superman. But he can create things. But he's in space. It's like when the Russian cosmonaut went out to space for the very first time and said, God's not here, I don't see him. Of course we don't believe in that kind of God. I mean, that's profoundly ignorant of the classical view of theism. I mean, it's profoundly ignorant. It's embarrassingly ignorant. So to say it this way, the God that I believe in is not a creature in the space-time continuum. David, why do you believe in a God who is not in the space-time continuum? Well, that's a good question. In fact, I wrote an entire book telling you why I think there is good evidence to believe there is a God, and that God is the source of creation. He is the source of the universe. He is not a part of the universe, no more than a painter is made of paint, or a potter is made of clay. I believe God is the personal agent, you might say, behind it all, underneath it all, above it all. He is the cause. Now, there's more there, but nevertheless, here's my point. Whatever my view is, you can disprove my view of God as long as you give me counter evidence. Here's one quick example to help you. Here's one way to disprove my God exists. At least my understanding of God. You need to prove to me that Jesus was not raised from the dead. That's one of the number one reasons why I'm a Christian and I'm a theist. You can disprove that if there's evidence for it. That is, you can try. And I am absolutely willing to be convinced. I don't want to believe in something stupid or delusional. So, you can try to disprove it. You can go try to find his bones. You can try to disprove all the gospel accounts and so forth. And this is where usually skeptics say, well, they're all a bunch of legends and fairy tales and whatever. Those people are not serious. There are numerous amount of books on the subject that do take it seriously. But all that to say, you can try to disprove it. Well, David, what about those other things besides the resurrection? Well, look at the reasons I give you and then disprove them all, or give overwhelming counter evidence. And of course, some atheists do try that. They try to do it by evil and suffering in the world. And usually that's the only thing. Usually for the average atheist skeptic, the one thing they need to say that here's my counter evidence, your good God exists, that is, there's evil and suffering. I do not find that compelling at all. And I'm going to do several podcasts on evil and suffering and grief. But some people do give that as evidence of why God does not exist. In fact, it argues for the existence of God because it assumes a moral law. If there's a moral law, there's a moral lawgiver. If there's no moral lawgiver and there's no moral law, what is the problem? There is no evil. There's no good. It just is. But the fact that atheists believe there is an evil and there is a good, a thing called evil, a thing called good, demonstrates there's a moral law. Well, where did we get that from? Moral laws don't evolve. Herd mentality evolves, but not morality. That's a different issue altogether. All that to say, thank you so much for writing in on my Twitter. You can disprove God. You can disprove a flying teapot, depending on how you define those terms, and depending on whether or not you have counter evidence. So, get the counter evidence. That's all you got to do. And I think you'll find if you talk to the average educated theist, they will not say God is just magical and there's nothing you can do about it. The average thinking Christian will give you some reasons why they actually believe God does exist. I am one of them. There are numerous Christians, particularly, who have given arguments, given what they consider to be evidence for God's existence. And I think it is not at all like saying it's just magical, you just got to believe. So I encourage you, read the books, read the literature, listen to the reasons they give, and when you give counter evidence to it, if it's compelling, well, then you'll make your case. And you'll make some other atheists just like yourself. But until that time, I'll keep being a Christian. God bless you, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you would like to ask me a question, contact me on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and I'll do my best to address your questions sometime on the air. And if not, doesn't mean I don't like you, just means I didn't have a chance to get to it. So let me know what your questions are. If you want more theological reflection, go to davidpendergrass.com. If you want more information about what I do in consulting, leadership consulting and consulting for churches, and also my marriage workshop, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com.